Thanks for tuning in to this episode of I Have Something to Say, where subject matter experts are unafraid and unapologetic about sharing their perspectives regarding issues that impact our lives. They speak up because basically they give a shit. So if you're tired of canned answers and want to finally hear real people cut through the BS and talk about real issues, this is the podcast for you. I'm your host, Sami Heyman Marrero from Urbender, and behind our mixer is our producer, Chris Majoka from UdoU.
Hello, everyone. I am so happy. I'm almost giddy because today I have some familia in the house. Hi, Jesi.
Hi, Sami.
I wanted to, a quick introduction. So Jesi Vega is the founder of Represent Editorial Services, and she does writing and workshops and storytelling, and she edits books, and she works in theater, and she just does she's like a modern day Renaissance woman. But I love her beyond words in more ways than one because she's also family. So our dads grew up together since they were little boys. So in our world, it means that we're extended family and we're like cousins. We grew up like cousins. Hi, Jesi. I'm so excited to finally have you on the podcast.
I'm getting tears in my eyes.
Oh, stop it. I love you, Mama. So I wanted to get you on the podcast because for the last, I want to say at least 4 or 5 years, we've been trying to figure out a way to work, like forcing, right? Trying to work. We got to work together. We got to work together, figure something out. And then we've been kind of toyed with a couple of projects, and one really small one just 2 years ago where we were writing editorials for a magazine and all of that, which was fun, but it was like, it really didn't like fulfill this longing for something powerful. And then I had a conversation last year with Kelly, and it was about, how as women of color, we're invited often to speak on panels and to like stuff other people are putting together and creating and developing, But it's to kind of fill in a spot, or to, present one perspective or voice, which is cool, But B, it's always free gigs. Like you don't get paid for it, which is fine too. It's always nice to contribute to the cause, but you look left and right and you're like, wait a second, how are all these other people, getting paid, right, for speaking engagements based on their experience and knowledge and their spheres of influence or whatever. Anyway, so we came up with this idea of developing our own platform, and you helped us create it. And so today I wanted to invite you to talk about how, what you've been doing already, as an entrepreneur, business owner, as a creator, and really helping people with their origin story and how you came to be, right? This resource for people to write their origin stories and how that whole concept, came to be also. Talk to me about your background and, how you arrived here. And then we'll get into this project because I'm like so excited about it because we're really getting ready to launch it soon.
Okay, so you want me to just start telling my story?
As you wish.
Okay. So I'll just say, just starting from when I was a little kid, the first thing when I was a teenager that I wanted to do when I grew up was be an actress. So I studied acting pretty seriously. I studied speech, which is why I don't have a New York accent or an accent like my mom. I have a pretty neutral sounding voice from that training. And then when I got to college, I had a horrible episodes of stage fright. And so I switched to another one of my passions, which was filmmaking. So I graduated from college as a film major, and it was my dream to make Star Wars for girls. That's what I would always tell people I wanted to do. I just want Star Wars for girls. So I graduated college, and it was a difficult time for me. And while I was struggling with what to do next, my dad gave me a gift of sending me to a meditation retreat for a week. So I was 22 years old. And at this meditation retreat, every night, the person who was leading the retreat would read passages from a 7,000-year-old story in Sanskrit called the Ramayana. And it was amazing. It was so exciting and engaging, and I couldn't believe that my interest was held by something that was 7,000 years old. But one of the nights when he was reading it, he read a passage from it, and it was really offensive to women. It was really horrible. And people complained. And so the next day, he came back and he talked about how that was a function of the translation. And then he changed the language and continued telling the story, and it adapted. And then we were back into the story. And there was something about that experience of being in the audience of a story that people had been listening to orally for 7,000 years, and how it could be updated on the spot, and how it was used to convey spiritual wisdom and inspiration and inspire people to be good Hindus, that I changed my whole direction and idea of what I wanted to do with life. And I decided I wanted to study storytelling. And right now in our culture, it's become kind of a hip, cool thing to study storytelling or to talk about it. But at that point, it wasn't at all. And I applied to the University of Chicago Divinity School with this proposal that I wanted to study the great storytelling traditions of the religions of the world. And they gave me this great fellowship, and basically they paid me to go to University of Chicago and start, studying this area that I had been passionate about all my life, because I just always loved movies and I always loved books, but I had never made the connection between stories and something really deeper in our lives and in our culture. So I did that, and for a while I thought I was going to be a professor of history of religion, and that turned out not to be the path I wanted to be on. And so then I went back to my original love, besides theater. It was film, and I started to write screenplays. So as a screenwriter, I moved to Los Angeles and got into that business and worked as an editor and assistant editor in documentaries and reality TV. And I produced a couple of independent short films and worked on behind the scenes on feature films. And I was in that world for more than a decade. And I was never happy. Like, it's a great story, but the truth of it is I was extremely unhappy. And I was never having the experience that I went there to have, which was to have a feeling of connection with people, like to feel like I was connecting with audiences. I had really looked up to writers and filmmakers as a kid when I was growing up. And then when I got to know them, some of them I love and they're still my friends, but I was really turned off by how commercial the business is. And of course it is. It's an industry.
Right.
But I was very idealistic. And, to bring it back to what you started out by saying, I was a Puerto Rican girl, a Jewish Puerto Rican girl from the Bronx, and I wanted to tell stories from my perspective, and I wanted to tell stories that mattered to me, and I wanted to tell stories that would matter to people who were like me. And from the moment I got there, like, you'll hear this from everyone, and it's like, how you deal with this is how you succeed or don't succeed in Hollywood. People are telling you how to tell your story. And if you're really lucky, you're you're the flavor of the month of the culture, and people want to hear that. But if the powers that be don't think that your people are important to sell a story to, not only will they say it that way, but they'll say that it's uninteresting, it's bad, it needs to be changed. It's just not, it's not commercial.
Right.
And that chipped away, like, not just at my confidence and my creativity, but it really chipped away at my soul in a really traumatizing way that I didn't realize until around the time my daughter was born. I essentially had a nervous breakdown. And I was in therapy, and every week, I wasn't working at the time because I was so I was so depressed. I would just cry about my career, like every week. I was just weeping, and I realized I had been in this business at that point it had been like 8 years, and I had been so determined to be tough that I hadn't let any of those rejections or comments or any of it get to me. And then it all came out, and it just couldn't stop coming out. And then at that point, I realized that I was done. What I realized is that there was nothing that could make me happy in Hollywood anymore.
Right.
Like the dream was over. Like at that point, I'd seen people in my life become successful, and even looking at their lives of the people I knew who were the most successful, like in cultural terms of successful.
Right.
I didn't want what they had. Like it was the craziest thing. I was like, I've seen it up close.
Yeah.
And I don't want a life that's all about appearances and meetings and ratings or marketability or whether something is commercial or not. And I have the utmost respect for people who do not mind those conversations and those meetings, because I still love and admire a lot of filmmakers, and I know what they're doing behind the scenes. And to me, it's the opposite of fun. Like, it was not a good life for me and my personality type. So I got out of that.
There goes debunking of completely like lopsided, right? You hear it, but like to have it laid out like that. So like, yeah.
I'll tell you, one of the deciding moments for me is I was a member of a filmmakers collective, and it was a great bunch of people. It was very like racially and ethnically diverse in Los Angeles, which is something that I needed, being from the Bronx. And we would all work on each other's film. And it was in the late 90s, and we had a relationship with Canon, the camera manufacturer. And they gave us one of the first high definition 3-chip digital video cameras on the market at the time. And they gave it to us like as a focus group. They wanted to know, like, how does this camera work? And I had like the privilege of being one of the first people in Los Angeles to make a film on digital that looked like it was made on film. And I made this short film, and it was very personal, and it was a very beautiful film. And it screened at the Directors Guild of America at a really nice screening. And there was a moment when I was standing in the back of the aisle, like just nervous as shit, because I had like really bad stage fright still. And it was the most phenomenal, beautiful thing. I was like, I made it. Like, there's my film with the best, being projected by the best projector on the best screen in the best venue. And I made it with like the most state-of-the-art camera. And afterwards, like, I got to give some, comments and talk, and everybody's like, yeah, your film is so beautiful. And I was like, when it was all over, I was like, that was really great. That was totally not worth everything that I have gone through to get to that moment. I was like, if the only happiness in my moment is when I'm standing in the back of a theater watching the film I made, then the rest of that's not life. Like, that's just like, that wasn't life. And it was so weird because it was as great as I had ever hoped it would be, but it did not make up for just all of the rest of it.
Yeah.
So that's putting it to you straight. It's a great high.
yeah, it's a great high, but it's almost disappointing too because it's not lasting, or it didn't like
Yeah.
really feel, yeah, you didn't feel fulfilled, right?
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
I think back at myself to like I was wearing the cutest outfit. Like I was just so fucking sexy that night. And I was like on top of the world. And then it's like you hear people say this, then you go home and then like I had some meetings and I gave my script to some agent or manager and he's like, it's great. Can you write something else that's more commercial? And I'm like,
Here we go. Exactly.
oh
Here
my
we
God,
go.
this sucks.
Yeah.
I thought once everybody loved my film, everybody would love everything I did, and everybody would love me.
And that's
no.
that's it, because you're fucking cute. Yeah.
So
Okay. Yeah. So that's when then you had this aha moment and said, wait a second. Yeah. And so then so you told your story. You said that you told a very personal story. And I know, I mean, it's like magic. When you start talking to people, because I've seen you in action, we'll get that into that in a minute, it, and then you know how to, it's almost like weaving. I've seen, and I'm like, how the hell does she do that? Just tapping into people's most vulnerable experiences and thoughts, and then helping weave them together, and then coming out on the other side with like a freaking amazing, powerful story that's like ready to deliver. Yeah. How did you come up with this? I think came natural to you, but like how you coach people to write their stories, and the whole, or the origins storytelling concept.
so it is a combination of things that I was trained in. So aside from my being a viewer of movies and plays for so many years, I studied screenwriting really intensively. And it's all about the hero's journey and a beginning, a middle, and an end, and a desire and moments and scenes. So there's all of these elements that go into a well-told story that when you're really like, forced to implement them like day after day after day, like I was as a beginning playwright and then as a screenwriter, you start to see the world that way. You start to hear how people talk that way. So that was one aspect of training. And then the other was that I was in Los Angeles, and my wonderful roommate at the time, who was Jenna Fisher, who went on to play Pam on The Office, she did a self-development workshop at Landmark Education, and she invited me to do it. And I saw that it had really basically cheered her up and made her more outgoing. And I thought that was really impressive. And I started taking courses there, and I ended up being trained to be a coach. And so I learned how to coach people on projects that they were doing. So I became a very project-oriented coach, and I would help people create measures and milestones and complete projects. But one of the things that I was trained to do was always to remind people of what is their end point? What are they committed to? What is what is this going to create in the world? Help people to maintain their inspiration during the hard parts of an endeavor. And how I was trained to do that was to really listen closely and to listen for not only what people were saying when they were talking about what they were doing, but I think the part that I brought to it that was innate is I really discovered a gift for feeling what people are saying, in whether it's my heart or my body, my energy field, whatever it was. I would say that's the thing that was innate that I always was bringing to my creativity that you could call a little X factor. but it's having this combination of being like really rigorously trained in story structure and this training in listening to what people are saying. And also, even when I'm disagreeing with what someone is saying, or I think it's stupid or pointless, pretending like what they're saying is the most important thing in the world. Like that was, we would do exercises like this where we would have someone, say something.
I need a crash course on that.
It's amazing because one of the exercises we would do is we would have someone tell a story. Like we'd say, like, tell me a story from your life, and then I would listen to them as if I thought that they were totally stupid. And when you listen to someone tell a story that way, the person who's talking forgets what they're saying and they kind of drift off and their story becomes worse and worse and worse. But if they're saying something and I am practicing thinking that what they're saying is the most fascinating thing I've ever heard, they actually start to tell a better story. And like doing that exercise and also being the storyteller of feeling what it feels like when someone thinks you're really uninteresting. I really learned that it's the quality of listening that can actually create the quality of the speaker.
Oh, wow.
I mean, it's just one of those things. So when people work with me, like I was just working with a poet on a manuscript that was astounding, like just an incredible, this incredible poet. And as I was giving her feedback, she was like, oh my God, I never would have been able to say the things I'm saying without you having read my poems. Right. So somehow the way that I read her poems had her able to make her poems even better. Good. And it's, one thing that I will say, and this is a little bit jumping around, but you can edit it, is that we're not going to. As an editor, one of the things that I've learned is not to take projects I don't love. Because if I am not aligned with the writer and I have to read their crap, which is what happened to me in Los Angeles a lot, all of my skills go out the window. I will not, like, if it's below a certain level of quality according to my standards, all of what I just said goes out the window. And I'm just like, I had early in my editing career, I had a manuscript. I don't think I actually threw it against the wall, but that was my feeling, like on page 3. Like I wanted to throw, and that was actually one of the projects that had me shift from being a nonfiction editor in the specialties that I was in to becoming an editor primarily for women of color writers. I still will take some white clients if their project is, otherwise in alignment with what I care about. But once I shifted from being the creative person to being the editor, I decided I wasn't going to make one of the mistakes that I made in my first career in Hollywood, which is just being angry all the time over racism and bias. And that was one of the things that really was insidious. It was part of what was chipping away at my soul. I mean, we're in a great moment where we had like Black Panther, and we've had so many. We have One Day at a Time about a Cuban family. Like we have these amazing projects that are about perspectives other than the dominant white perspective, and that was nowhere on the horizon when I was in Los Angeles, except that Shonda Rhimes was on The Ascension. And one of my friends went to work for Shonda Rhimes, and she became a producer on Grey's Anatomy. And she was one of the people who I was like, she has a great life. I don't even want her life. I don't want to write Meredith Grey's love story. And that was, at that time, that was the pinnacle of diversity in television with Grey's Anatomy. And it's Shonda Rhimes is a goddess in her own right. But I still didn't want to be in that commercial realm. So bringing us, closer to more recent history, I was like, I'm going to take this bold step, and I am not going to work on anything where I have to be some white writer's DEI educator or deal with their implicit bias or have a conversation that was a real game changer for me, where I was working with a white client and I said, you wrote a memoir, you never mentioned that you were white. And she was like, I don't know why that matters. And this was such a privileged white girl. Like I said, you're not going to get any people of color reading your book because you're so privileged about your point of view. And it's, you could at least show some self-awareness about it. But she wasn't ready to go there. And I was like, you know what? I don't ever want to have to say that to someone ever again. That is a waste of my life energy, of my life force.
Okay, Jesi, but tell me how you really feel. No, yeah, it's like you've been there. The thing is, you've been there, done that, put in the work, and you see that gap too. You see that gap that yes, people are raising their voices and being more vocal and stuff like that, but they don't have perhaps the tools, the guidance to bring it up to that level where it's like, that's your story, and that's what you want to provide to women of color, is to be able to harness all of that yumminess, the good, the bad and the ugly. Let's call it yumminess, because the good, when you have the good, that's how you went through the bad, but all of it, harness all of it, and then put together your origin story, and really, like that really reflects your identity authentically, your vulnerabilities and your power. And you know where I'm going with this, right? You came up with that vulnerability and power, remember?
Yes. So So I've been thinking recently about what have I learned from my clients and who are my ideal students and clients. And one of the things that I've realized is that, the women I work with are women of color, like successful professional women of color, like either they're in an executive area or they're working in nonprofits and social workers and teachers, working in that realm. And we all have had the experience that we know more than we're allowed to say because what we know hasn't been welcome in the environments that we're working in. So we're walking around with a lot of truth and a lot of observations and a lot of feelings and experience. And we've had to push it down because that's our survival mechanism, right? Like if you start mouthing off in some environments, you're either, not going to get the promotion that you want, or you're going to get overlooked for another project, or as I used to do, you're just going to walk away and never want to work with those people again because I worked freelance. And I started to see that there's so much that is getting lost in the world because women of color, they're succeeding, they're making an appearance, but they're not welcome to bring their whole self to the table or the panel, right? Like you're a woman of color on a panel with a lot of white people. What I would really want to say is like, what the fuck? Like you're pretending like you value my voice, but like I'm totally tokenized here.
Right.
And it's fun to listen to me on the panel, isn't it? Yeah. But like, is that going to change your business practices? No, it's not. So
I know. And it's such a stifling feeling, right? To listen to comments or sometimes even condescending and not be able, and in your mind, you're thinking it, right? But you have to say, but you're thinking you're full of shit and you're full of shit over there too. And you see that guy over there, he's full of shit too.
Right. And that's not why they invited you to the panel. So, there's this element of game playing that is really fatiguing. And one of the things that I've discovered is that, like, when you're not given the opportunity to be authentic, you lose the opportunity. You lose the opportunity to really know who you are and know what your story really is. And when someone's story, like their origin story, is undistinguished, or they're on autopilot with it, they don't know who they are sometimes, and they are confused about like where they're going, or they don't have access to their own wisdom, and people don't get to know who they are, and people don't get to be inspired or touched by who they are. And I can say, for my part, when I was trying to, like, on the one hand, I had my private self as who I was, and then I had my public self trying to, like, make it as a basically totally white passing woman in LA. Then I was more like dogged by my demons, right? Like, then I had so much more that I was trying to cover up, and so much more shame, and I felt so much more vulnerable and unlovable, and I could never be successful enough because I just wasn't free to be present. And I feel like the gift of, when I work with clients as storytellers, or even as writers, like, by the way that I listen to them, I'm giving them the gift of them being able to be present to who they are already, that they haven't been able to be in public, right? That they haven't been able to share with people because it's not safe. And, my dream is a world where it is safe, to be all of who all of us are. Women of color, BIPOC people, white people. Like, white people have their own. It sucks to be white. Like, I'm not like, but I'm not here to do that work with people. I say all the time, because it's tempting, because people want to work with me, but that's not my work. But my work is different, which is to create the space in which, look, a lot of the women that I work with, they came from, like, poor or working class backgrounds, and they were, like, either smarter or more talented or something. They had something that took them out of that environment and into this very white dominated, professional environment. And it came at a cost, like we benefit a lot from it. I'm surprised almost every single day at the amazingness of the house that I live in. Fuck. Like, I know how I got here, and I'm like, how did I get here? Like, it's so far from where I came from. And it's what enables me to do the work that I do. But for a long time, like, that journey came at a cost. And the cost it came at was that I didn't feel free to tell my real story. Like, I was trying to, pretty it up or make it seem like, everything was fine over here. And it wasn't. And once I started to say, like, wow, you know what? Like, being a Puerto Rican Jew from the Bronx and leaving that environment and coming out into all of these other, like, very white environments was traumatizing to me. And that seemed like the one thing I was not allowed to say in life. Like, that I was not allowed to put that in any story. Like, everything had to be on top of that. And once I started to say that, like, so many more stories opened up for me. And I started to, I really feel like it's when I started to hit my groove and understand how to put my skills of, like, listening and coaching and story structure in the service of what I really care about, which is, people who grew up in somehow, like, marginalized or disadvantaged or just not mainstream environments, and who are here now to say something, and they want a way to say it. They want to be guided into how to say it. And there's so much, like, crap that gets piled on over the years because, I'll I'll give an example.
Mm-hmm.
I spent a lot of time in like kind of new agey spiritual circles in Los Angeles, and a lot of times people would end up like holding hands, right, and like singing, and I hated it. And I'd always, in my mind, I was like, I don't get these white ladies, you know? But that was the thing that I couldn't say. And so even though those were supposed to be safe spaces, and maybe they were safe spaces for the people who felt at home in those spaces, it wasn't for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I felt like, you know, through no fault of whoever was facilitating those wonderful everybody hold hands circles, you know, it wasn't, it really wasn't the right place for me to bring my experiences, because when I would, people didn't, they didn't know how to deal with it. And so yeah, I still feel like a little like, and as you can tell, I'm an extremely emotionally volatile person, and I feel things really passionately. And sometimes I think like I'm overreacting, but
it's good. I you know what, I honestly find it refreshing, you know, and I tend to be that way too. Sometimes it, you know, depending on the situation and the context, it's like, oh snap, who's that? You know, who just said that, you know? And so I've learned how to not change, or it's just it's timing. Sometimes it's just about timing, and I just, being an entrepreneur, it gives me that freedom of, you know, saying what I want to say. But also I've been practicing timing, and just also leveraging relationships, you know, to also really know that I'm not crazy, that it's not just me that feels that these things, you know, do affect you, and do try to, how do you say again, limit, you know, how you show up, you know?
yeah,
And so,
yeah.
yeah. And so talking about showing up, it was like an epiphany. So last October, I gave you a call, and I said, hey, I was talking to my friend Kelly, and we were talking about, you know, how, again, going back to the panels and about speaking engagements. And I told her, hey, the new year is right around the corner. And, you know, what do you feel like is on your bucket list, you know, that you would like to do? And she's like, girl, I want to start, you know, getting paid gigs. Right. And I'm like, I love that. And I told her, hey, I've had this idea simmering, you know, in the back of my brain for at least 2 years. What do you think? And I told her about this idea of getting a group of women of color, you know, and have like a TED Talk meets vagina monologues meets, I don't even know, you know, but on stage, and to be able to tell our stories. And I didn't even know how the hell to come. And she loved it. She's like, oh my God, that would be so cool. And so then I immediately thought of you. I'm like, okay, let me call Jesi, because if anybody can figure out how to help us tap into our origin story, because I already knew what you do, right? And the magic, and and the, like, that magic potion that you have. And then on top of that, weave them all together, you know. So let me call her up, and that's what I did. You know, we called the concept confetti, right? And in general terms, it's because, you know, confetti are like little specks of paper, and they're all in different shapes and in different colors. And and individually, that's all they are, like specks that we feel, you know, like our, but then together becomes like this beautiful festive kind of form of expression. And so anyway, so what did you think when I came up to you and told you about this project?
Yeah, when you called me, it was like, you know, great minds thinking alike. And it was also, I think you knew, because we had sort of started to try to get something else off the ground earlier in the year, that it was already material I'd been working with since I had been invited by a publisher with a small publishing company up here in Washington the year before to do a workshop for non-writers who were immigrants to write their stories for an anthology about the immigrant experience. So I kind of had I had these outlines prepared for how to guide non-writers through telling their own stories. And then you came to me with this idea, like, let's do it. And what was really interesting about it, though, is it wasn't like we didn't know what people's stories were going to be about at all. We just had the faith, and because you knew all of these women, you knew they had stories to tell. But what we didn't know is what stories would they be telling? How would our stories come together? And what were going to be the threads that wove between everything that we were saying, so that we all were maintaining, like, we're definitely individuals, but you could see that there was something very universal about it.
Yeah.
And, I sweated through many of our sessions. Like, honestly, I was like, I don't know where it's going. But the thing that I had going for me, again, because of, in this case, my training with coaching, is I knew we were going to get there. And that sometimes you just have to let people feel what's inside them. And one of the things that is so powerful about doing storytelling work with non-writers, particularly, is people don't even know the incredible story that they are living out in their life, and that will be a gift to other people once they hear it. And so for me, I think that that's it's a main tenet of my faith as a human being is, I wrote it on my Instagram yesterday, everybody is living a hero or heroine's journey, whether you know it or not. And if you have the privilege or just the gift in life to have someone help you find that, it's one of the greatest gifts we can have, because it's really easy to not see that about our own selves, even if the people who love us see that, or maybe the people who know us don't even know that. I will say that the people around me, I had a lot of positive feedback, and people loved my writing, and I had a lot of great friends, and they thought hey, Jesi, she's really great. But I didn't have that, because my story was, I don't fit in. I don't know what's the matter with me. I can't, why am I not as successful as, my friends from college? That was my story, is that I hadn't made it. I'd blown my film career. But the people who knew me saw something totally different. And it was through my own process of, it was actually in a memoir writing workshop for about a year, where I started to get wow, my story looks really different to other people than it does to me. And I want to start being the person that my story says that I can be. Yeah. And I would say that was a huge part of me learning how to draw it out of people, and also understand there's always gold in there. Yeah. And that with some compassion and listening and creating a really safe space where it's okay to say anything and be stupid or whatever, it'll come out, and it can be really transformational. Yeah. And the other part that I learned from not from my memoir group, but from when I was once presenting my memoir work to another group of people, was that in order to protect myself from the emotional content of what I was saying, I presented my story very clinically. I would say, this happened, then this happened, then this happened. And someone once said to me, that's an interesting story, but you never said how you felt about it. At the moment this woman asked me how I felt, I will never forget. It was a seminal moment in my life as a creative. I said, oh, I was really scared. And all it was my whole body was kind of flushed with the fear that I had been suppressing my whole adult life. Yeah. And you probably if you think, you remember, I will say this to people, I get it. How did it feel at that moment? And those are the riskiest moments for the storyteller, those are the most important moments for me as a facilitator to make sure this person knows it's okay to have that emotion right now. And those are often the pivotal moments in the story.
Yeah.
Where there's that emotion that the storyteller is, it's like they're protecting themselves. They're afraid to say it because the only way they've survived is by not saying it.
By not saying it. Well, you know what? The experience of developing, this, what is it? This program, this presentation, this group. What is it, Jesi? What is it? Confetti. It's like this presentation or show, whatever we want to call it, but it's not really a show. It's like a shared experience.
It's an experience. Yeah.
Obviously for very selfish reasons, I invited my friends, so I knew, I thought, I knew them very well. So I wasn't surprised by anything that we were able to unpack together. But it brought, I feel like going through our stories, and going into that vulnerable, but then also very powerful place, and allowing ourselves to really share, all of these experiences in a very raw, direct way really brought me closer to them. Yeah, I love these women. Like, I love them, Shalonda and Luna and Kelly and Simi and Pooja and you and Tali, all of us, all of them, and then now, after we spent, what was it, like 8 sessions, 3 months, right? 3 months, more or less?
Yeah.
Every other week, for that hour and a half, just crafting this collective story about, 8 modern women, and our perspectives and, the things that we have in common, but our unique experiences. And then as women of color on top of that, and all of the stages, so that we also have like the generational thing, with Tali being the very young one. I'm not going to say who's the oldest, but but it's like we're running the full gamut, and every story is so different, but so the same at the same time. It was crazy. It was just crazy to me. You as the listener, right? And as the conductor, of this symphony, how, just tell me what now looking back, what do you think about this process, and about what we're about to do with the actual, now it's going to be like a virtual online presentation, but what are your thoughts about from day one until we are now?
I think the process of each woman developing her story and what she's able to share now, like the only language I have for it is like I have gotten to see each woman like become a rock star in my eyes. Like I have so much awe for the experiences that they've gone through and the wisdom that they've gained from it and what they've done. And I like an example that I use when I look at a collaborative or an ensemble that's working well, I always think of the Beatles, right? Like there was 4 of them and you could tell each one was different, and you almost couldn't pick which one was the best, because like depending on the day you'd be like, oh, Ringo, he's funny, or George, he's soulful, or Paul, he's cute. And that's always the highest compliment I can give an ensemble. And I feel like our process created I don't know who I like, whose story I like better. Is it Pooja's? Is it Yolanda's? Like, oh my God. Like whichever one is happening, I'm like, this is the most interesting thing that I've ever heard.
Yeah.
And what makes it so interesting is often the things that the speaker herself has taken for granted in her life. She's been like, oh, you don't want to hear about that part. And I'm like, I do. Tell me about the part you take for granted. So yeah, I think like it has each individual just glisten like a jewel, like I started calling everybody sparkles, right? Because it's like I have so much love for each and every one of you. And yeah, I feel like everybody's inner sparkle has been brought out. And I feel like people will watch that and they'll have that same experience of falling in love with each person. And frankly, like, just not to spend too much time on my soapbox about representation, but that's why my company is called Editorial, is that as young people, when we didn't see people who looked like us or who had our experiences be the rock star or the main character or be someone we could fall in love with, it diminished our capacity to fall in love with ourselves. And that's what we give people when we tell our story, is that there's always someone in the audience who has never seen themselves reflected before, and now they've seen it, and it makes, I feel like I'm always just a little bit more on the planet and a little bit more here when I see a story that resonates with my own story, where I thought, God, I thought I was the only one. And until we live in a world where everybody's story is available somehow, there's always going to be people who feel like they don't really belong, or that there's no place for them. And I really believe, like, God, there's no mistakes, right? Like, nobody's here by mistake. But it often takes telling our story or hearing someone else's story to get how much we belong. We belong here. And so that's why, like, almost like every single one of my, Instagram posts is like #representation matters, because it's the thing, like, it's the thing that the lack of representation of Puerto Rican Jewish girls from the Bronx in media is the thing that led me to think I had to be someone else. And it was the beginning of a path of creating a self based on white people who I saw in media and books that I could never be. I could never be anyone than myself, but I had no example for who I was. And it was, it was very painful, and I didn't even know what pain I was feeling. But I knew that I wanted to write it. Like, I knew that was what I was here to correct, and I just didn't know how it was going to happen.
Well, I'm just thankful, though, that you helped us, put it all out there, on the table, and that you helped us sort it out, because I think that the end result is going to be awesome. It's kind of scary, though, because
it's terrifying.
It's terrifying because we're putting ourselves out there. But I think it's what you just said. It's going to be worth it, because the higher goal, right, is to maybe my daughter, or some young woman out there will see this and say, hey, that's me, or I can do that too, so,
yeah. And I think, knowing, for me, one of the major moments in shifting the course of my professional life, I was in front of a crowd at a rally a couple of years ago, and someone said something like, the Black people or people of color over here, and white people over here, like, look at each other, something like that. And I was the person, like, at the mic, and I didn't know where I was supposed to stand. So when it was my turn to speak next, I said, I'm a Jewish Puerto Rican. I didn't know where to stand when we did that exercise. And after I said that, maybe like 8 people came up to me from the crowd of like 100 people and were like, I know that happened to me too. And I thought, wow, there's this whole unspoken experience of people from mixed backgrounds. And it was when I started to realize, like, just just saying your truth.
Yeah.
It inspires other people to say their truth.
Yes, absolutely. Well, listen, I want to thank you for everything, for helping us out, for being there for me and for all the other girls, for sharing your gift, for being our coach. And I'm excited. I can't wait to see, what happens once we go live with this thing.
Yeah.
It's so exciting. It's terrifying.
It's scary.
It's exciting. It's scary as shit I've done in my life, but it'll be good.
Yeah.
So, okay. So I'll talk to you soon though, right? I'll call you offline.
Okay. I love you.
I love you too. Bye.
Bye-bye.
This concludes this episode of I Have Something to Say. We want to thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to tell your friends about us. We're on Spotify and iTunes as well. There's more to come next week. And remember, if you have something to say, it's time to speak up.